So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar on a beautiful Earth Day here in Alexandria. I can't think of a better way to spend an hour of Earth Day than talking with a bunch of people about environmental policies that affect climate change. My name is Scott Barstow, as you can see on the title slide there. Hopefully I matched that picture somewhat. I've been an Alexandria resident for about 15 years or so, and during that time, I've had the privilege of being able to work with some really wonderful people, several of whom are in attendance here today. Thank you for joining us. And two of those people, Stephen Koenig and David Peabody, the three of us decided we wanted to work together to pull together this webinar. So you can get the screen to, okay, here we go. So I'm going to just spend a little bit providing some context and then try and get to Dr. Paulson and to Tim Wilson. But as context, so as I'm sure most of you know, the city of Alexandria has recognized that climate change is an emergency, and in keeping with its environmental activity, adopted an environmental action plan, EAP 2040, which is an update of the earlier plan. The resolution that the council adopted saying that it recognized that climate change was an emergency was adopted exactly a year and a half ago in October of 2019. And in July of 2019, the action plan, the EAP 2040, was adopted. And in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, this is the breakdown that the city determined was going on in terms of the community's emissions as of 2015. So as you can see, commercial buildings and residential buildings energy use accounted for close to 57, 58% of all of the community's greenhouse gas emissions. And that proportion has stayed pretty constant. So here is a more recent comparison of greenhouse gas emissions inventories for 2005, 2012, 2015, 2018. The numbers are coming out every 3 years in coordination with work from the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. And thankfully they've been going down, which is great. But you can still see, even though it's not labeled here, the blue and the green are the energy use associated with buildings. So along the lines of the adage or the question that, all right, well, someone asks a bank robber why you rob banks, the response being, because that's where the money is. This is where a lot of the emissions are. So you can see they've been going down, as I said. The crunch that we're in now is that in order to meet the 50% reduction by 2030 target, we're going to have to go twice as far in only 9 years rather than 13. So we have some work ahead of us. And there's a reason to think that that 50% target might be the minimum that we need to be shooting for, and we may need to start shooting for more, for deeper reductions. This is a very compelling slide that David Peabody found for us from The Guardian from just a few days ago. And it shows you how rapidly we're heading into the red here in terms of the amount of emissions that we can pump into the atmosphere and still have a decent chance of avoiding a very dangerous level of warming. So it's entirely possible that scientific research will come out that makes it clear that we need to reduce emissions even more quickly and shoot for a lower target. So that's one reason that we should consider the 50% reduction target the minimum that we should shoot for. And the other reason is equity. So the rough estimate from the scientific community is that worldwide, we need about a 50% reduction. But if you break it down in terms of each country's per capita emissions, it starts to look a little bit more nuanced than that. And it's one thing to have everyone be trying to achieve a 50% emissions reduction, but when our emissions on a per capita level are so much higher than most other people's, again, that argues for us trying to do even more than the 50%, which obviously will be difficult enough. This is a slide from the UN Environment Program's 2020 emissions gap report that came out in December, which is a really excellent report. Here's another slide from the same report, which breaks it down in terms of income, not by where you live, what nation you're in, but your income level relative to the global population. And the 2030 target translates into just a little over a 2 ton per person average. So that's a even steeper reduction that suggests we need for the richest part of the globe. So another reason to be aggressive. And last, before I turn it over to Dr. Paulson, this is a chart that was in the emissions gap report that does very succinctly describes the types of changes that we need. And as you can see, decarbonization of the building sector and of the transport sector. In other words, what kind of buildings we put up, what kind of developments we put up, what kind of transportation modes people have access to are a big part of the solution. So Alexandria, local governments the world over do have an important role to play, which is why we wanted to focus on this. So with that, let me stop screen sharing and turn it over to Dr. Paulson.
Okay, you need to give me permission to share my screen, please.
You should have it.
Let's see, there we go. Great. All right. So I want to talk about climate change being a health problem, because it really is. Climate change is impacting on the health of every single human being in Alexandria. It is impacting on the health of every single human being on the face of the earth. And health solutions are climate solutions. And we'll talk about how health solutions can be climate solutions. So I'm Jerry Paulson. I'm a pediatrician and a climate activist. I've lived in Alexandria since 1991 or 2. I'm a professor emeritus at George Washington University, and I do some work with the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions here in the city of Alexandria. So let's look in some detail at this image from the U.S. Global Change Research Report. So climate impacts, wind, fire, sea level rise, temperature rise, rain, or drought. And sometimes it's combinations and permutations of these things, which when you start to list them together begin to sound like the biblical plagues from Passover, which just ended a couple of weeks ago. So any and all of these can have impacts on kids, on adults, on the elderly. The most important health impact related to climate change, in my own opinion, is mental health. For a lot of people, just the prospect of climate change as it exists now and climate change as they see it as a threat to their future can result in stress and anxiety, depression, can have major mental health impacts. And then, of course, when you get into some of the severe weather events, the hurricanes or the flooding or the tornadoes or flooding from sea level rise, any of these things that can be associated with climate change, they can have their own mental health impacts as well. There's a problem with heat-related illness, allergies, infectious disease changes. So we have a lot of health issues that are related to climate change. And none of those health issues exist in isolation. They're all interrelated in some ways. So, for example, when it gets warmer, then ozone, one of the components of air pollution, gets worse. When you, sorry about that. When you have a drought, it causes refugee problems. And when you have severe weather events, it causes refugee problems. And when you have severe weather events, it can cause floods, which can lead to vector-borne diseases. So none of these things exist in isolation. They all interact with one another. Talking about heat-related illness, even today in Virginia, every summer, this becomes a significant problem. This is some data from the Virginia Department of Health back in the summer of 2016, June 1st to August 14th. And as you can see, as you get further into the summer and it gets warmer, you get more heat-related illness, more among the men than the women. That's probably related to the fact of more men working outside. This is a very high risk for athletes, high school and college athletes who are doing summer practices for fall sports. At its mildest, these people can have dehydration, and at the worst, they can die from heat stroke. In terms of mosquitoes, here in the top images of the United States, you can see the current distribution of Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus. These are mosquitoes that can carry dengue, yellow fever, chikungunya, which is a viral illness, and Zika. And you can see that here in 2020, this is a problem. Mosquitoes are primarily in the southern part of the United States, not exclusively, but primarily in the southern part of the United States. And the projection is by 2050, they will be all over the place. And interestingly enough, if you look closely at this map, there may be fewer Aedes aegypti in the southern part of the United States because it's actually gotten too hot. And this is going to impact on those of us here in Virginia as these mosquito species migrate north. We have a problem in Alexandria with flooding when it rains very heavily. Some of that is related to our combined stormwater and sewage drainage system that the city's been working on for a number of years and has made some progress on. But this is a picture from Delray on September 16th, 2020. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And aside from the sewage that is in this flood water, aside from the feces that are in this flood water, think about all of the stuff that was in people's garages and basements, all of the paints and pesticides and fertilizers and gasoline and all sorts of other hazardous materials that are contained in these floodwaters and spread throughout Delray, in this case, not some far distant place. So I'm a pediatrician, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that children are not little adults. Kids drink more water per pound of body weight than adults do. So if the water is contaminated, they get a higher dose of the contaminant. They breathe more air per pound of body weight than adults do. So if that air is polluted with volatile organic compounds or carbon monoxide or particulate matter, they get a higher dose than the adults do. Kids eat more food per pound of body weight. Kids have a longer shelf life. So think about it this way. If I, at my age, and you can guess how old I am, get exposed to something, but the impact may take 40 years for it to occur, may not be around. But if a 7-year-old gets that exposure, they are highly likely to be around 40 years from now when the adverse event occurs. And finally, kids need help making decisions. They don't know which way to run in a flood or a tornado. If they get separated from their parents or their teachers in a severe weather event, they don't know what to do and can be harmed. Now, I don't want a discussion about climate change, and specifically about climate change and health, to be all doom and gloom. And so I do want to point you to this project called Project Drawdown. The website is up here, www.drawdown.org. And in great detail, they have gone through over 100 possible climate change interventions and rated them in terms of the impact on the overall problem. Why is refrigeration number one? Well, the gases that are used to make refrigerators and air conditioning units work are very powerful greenhouse gases themselves. And so when they are released into the environment, they cause a big problem. And if, as climate change gets worse, more air conditioners are deployed around the globe, and then they leak or the gas is allowed to escape when they come to their end of life, they are very potent greenhouse gases. So managing that problem is actually the biggest thing that we can do as a global civilization. Offshore wind turbines, here in Virginia, there's a commitment to build some large-scale offshore wind turbines that'll be very helpful for us in Virginia and very helpful for the globe. Reducing food waste. How many times have you gone to your own doctor and she or he has said, eat less red meat? And a plant-rich diet is a very good climate change intervention. And I'll talk about some of these others in a little bit. So again, getting back to the notion that climate solutions are health solutions, I want to focus on 4 things: clean energy, active and electrified transportation. How many times has your doctor told you to walk? Diet, I've already mentioned that a little bit. And then we need to organize. We need to come together and demand changes. You know, today is Earth Day. It's a great time to do that convening. We have heard some very hopeful words from President Biden today, from Special Envoy Kerry, from Gina McCarthy, from Michael Reagan, who's the administrator of EPA. And so a lot of organizing that's gone on over the last 4, 10, 15 years, hopefully is starting to pay off, but that doesn't mean we're done, and we need to continue to organize. We need a carbon-free energy production system to the extent that we can get there. Wind, solar, other carbon-free means of producing energy. What that means is that there will be no particulate matter from fossil fuel production. There are other sources of particulate matter in the air, fossil fuel burning, not production. Fossil fuel burning is not the only source, but there won't be any particulates from burning fossil fuels. There won't be any oxides of sulfur or nitrogen from burning fossil fuels. There won't be any ozone related to the burning of fossil fuels. Again, that doesn't mean there won't be any ozone, but at least it won't be coming from fossil fuels, and the overall ozone levels will be much decreased. Ozone occurs when oxides of nitrogen, volatile organic compounds, both of which are products of fossil fuel productions, whether it's from the tailpipe of a motor vehicle or the smokestack of industry. When they are heated up in the atmosphere and exposed to sunlight, ozone is formed. You can think of ozone as basically causing a chemical burn in the lungs. So when ozone is inhaled, the mucous membranes in the windpipe and the actual tissue in the lungs themselves are burned. And you know, when you burn your hand, you burn your arm, there's some swelling there, and that swelling is going to interfere with the ability to get air in and out. It's going to interfere with the ability of oxygen to get into the blood from the lungs and carbon dioxide to come out of the lungs into the exhaled air, come out of the blood and into the exhaled air. So, and this irritation of the lungs for people who have asthma, this can set them off and cause an asthma attack. For older adults who have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, sometimes called emphysema, again, this irritant of ozone can cause problems with their COPD. When we think about particles in the lungs, think about driving down the highway 15 years ago or 20 years ago, and you're behind that dump truck or some other big diesel truck, and we all used to see those plumes of black smoke that would come out of the exhaust. And we would think that that was horrible, and it certainly wasn't good. But in reality, the stuff you could see were large particles, and those which are about 2.5 microns, so it's not very large, those particles are basically filtered out in the nose and in the throat and don't get to the lungs. It's what you can't see that is the problem. And so those trucks are still producing fine and ultrafine particulate matter. Automobiles are still producing fine and ultrafine particulate matter. These particles are smaller than a grain of sand. They are about 10 times smaller than the size of a human hair, and they will get all the way down into the lungs. They also can actually go from the lungs through the walls of the blood vessels and into the blood circulation itself, where they can trigger heart attacks and strokes. So fine particulate matter is a very significant problem, and getting rid of fossil fuel burning is going to get rid of these fine and ultrafine particles that are human produced and give us much greater protection. That some of that comes by electrifying the transportation fleet, but it also comes from walking, biking. We want as many zero emission vehicles as we can have, and we're making progress in Virginia to support more zero emission vehicles in our state. The more that we can encourage people to make their short trips either on foot or by bicycle, that's good for them and it's good for the environment. The widespread use of zero emission vehicles, these are national figures, but $72 billion in avoided health harms, about 6,300 lives saved every year, about 93,000 fewer asthma attacks every year, and 416,000 fewer lost days of work. And we have to remember, when kids get sick, not only do they miss school, but as we've learned from this pandemic, when kids stay home, some adults got to stay home with them and would often then lose a day's pay because they had to miss that day's work. So here's some information about diet. And there's a lot of pounds of CO2 equivalent that comes from meat and dairy. The methane that comes out of the mouths, not the rear end, but the mouths of cows used in beef production or dairy production is a large driver of these pounds of CO2 equivalent. Methane, as you know, is a more potent but shorter lived greenhouse gas than CO2 itself. But you also have to think about, you want a steak here in Virginia. Well, there are some cows that are grown here in Virginia, but the vast majority of beef for human consumption in the United States is grown in the West, and that's got to be transported here. So there's some folks who've created the idea of a meatless Monday. So it doesn't mean that everybody's got to be a vegan or totally vegetarian, just one day without any meat. And we could save 1.2 million tons of CO2 equivalent, which is the same CO2 equivalent produced by all of France. So again, I want to leave everybody with this notion of organizing. And I've put up the logos here of a number of organizations that you could potentially participate in, where they are in the page, high, low, left, right. None of that means anything. None of them are any better than the other. They do different things. and they do some similar things as well. But any or all of these organizations are worth your time. And, none of us can solve this problem by ourselves. We will all make greater progress if we are part of a system than if we try and tilt at windmills by ourselves. And we all have a responsibility to participate in the work of solving the problem of climate change. Now, given that you all are on a webinar about climate change on a Thursday evening, I suspect that most of you are committed to this cause already. But again, if you're looking for some place to put some time, any of these organizations would welcome your time, would welcome your dollars too. Let's be frank. But you can do more by organizing. And I will stop sharing my screen at this point and turn it over to Tim. And I thank you all very much. And I look forward to questions in a few minutes.
Thank you so much, Jerry.
Thank you, Jerry. See if this will come up. I think it's always interesting to see these presentations and see what information you can pick up. Jerry, from here's the mosquito thing that scares me. I live on the river, so seeing the mosquitoes is an issue. That's kind of something I hadn't thought about.
Yeah, they're coming for you.
My wife's going to hate it. So I got a little presentation here. First of all, I'm Tim Wilson from Gundersen Health Systems, La Crosse, Wisconsin. I'm the energy and engineering manager in our facility operations group. So I'm a FAC ops guy dealing with buildings. So we're probably going to go a little deeper with this presentation. Just kind of digging into some nuts and bolts. My idea here is to just kind of give you some history on where we've been, where we are, and kind of where we're going as an organization with our energy program. And my hope is just to try and energize someone. If it's one person, that's great. If it's two people, that's great. Just to kind of see what we're doing and see if there's something you can pick and take away from what we've been doing. Some good stuff. And we've made some mistakes along the way too, but I think we've done a lot of good action and good things we'd like to share. So first of all, a little about Gundersen. We are a physician-led organization in La Crosse, Wisconsin. You can see kind of in this tri-state area over here, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa. I actually live over in Iowa. We're an integrated system. We've got a main hospital in La Crosse, Wisconsin, 325-bed facility there. We've got clinics spread all over the place, about 60 facilities kind of spread all over, very rural, obviously. We've got 6 critical access hospitals as well, about 8,500 employees, about 8,000 to 9,000 providers. We've got about 3.5 million square foot. That number has been growing rapidly. I think in 2008, when we kind of started on this mission, it was around 2 million square foot. So it's growing quite a bit over the years. Back in 2008, Gundersen set out on a mission to become energy independent. That was the primary objective, was to produce more power than it consumed through fossil fuel use. And really, you look at the reasons why Gundersen wanted to do that was to make our healthcare more affordable was a big part of it. Affordability was a piece of it. Benefit human health. Jerry just talked about a bunch of stuff on human health issues there. Strengthen our regional economy. We wanted to stop sending checks off to these utility companies somewhere else. I don't know where they are, Texas, wherever they are, and start, investing more in our regional economy, buying things from local folks, employing local folks to do work for us, and then really to improve the environment as well. What you see down here is a roadmap that we kind of took over those years. Starting back in 2008, we did a lot of conservation initially for the first several years, and we still do it today. Conservation is a huge part of it and always will be, but a lot of conservation to start with. Then we started getting into some off-site generation. We did some wind sites in Lewiston. We did a landfill biogas project with the city of Onalaska, where we buy gas from the landfill and burn it and sell power to the to Excel, and then also use the heat off that engine to heat our campus in Onalaska. We did another wind project at Cashton. You see this big jump here. See, our goal is to get up to 100%. This big jump here was a biomass boiler on our main campus in La Crosse. And that biomass boiler actually basically offsets nearly all of our gas consumption on the campus for most of the year, except for in the winter when it gets really, really cold. And then you can see we kind of dropped down. We built a new hospital, 500,000 or 450,000 square foot facility. I'll touch on that a little bit too with a couple of slides. We did some geo heat pumps work. Then we did two dairy biogas projects. This is where we take manure from milking facilities, and we take the manure, grab the gas, digest it, and burn that gas to provide power. And then we did some more conservation. So in October 2014, we actually got to the point where we could produce more we'd consider renewable sources rather than burning fossil fuels. And we were able to do that for the first time in October of 2014. We've done it many, many times, many days, weeks, months since then, but we never did get quite to a full year. We started to grow too much and kind of got behind on that. So as you're looking at your organization and trying to move down this path and trying to make some decision on do you want to go down this path? How hard do you want to go down this path? You should really look at your strategic mission, your mission, your strategic plan. This is really a selling point in our organization, how we sold working and spending money and time on this. Because if you look at our mission right in here, it says improve the health in the communities we serve. So my guess is you probably have a mission similar where you're a healthcare organization. You probably have some mission around there as well. So you can really tie improving and working on energy and spending money on energy projects and tie it back to your strategic mission. And for me as a FAC ops guy, when I look at our strategic plan, I can talk to my guys and say, what we're doing is tied right to our strategic plan. We're improving the health of our communities. By doing these energy projects, we're helping the health of our communities. And a big one is easing the financial burden. This is stated right in our strategic plan, is we're going to ease the financial burden of healthcare. So that's a way we can tie and really sell our management team, sell other stakeholders on, investing in these energy projects. Why healthcare providers should care about clean energy? Jerry just touched on a whole bunch of stuff. Pollutants, birth defects, we just saw a presentation on that. Scott touched a little bit on this one as well. According to the Department of Health, hospitals are 2.5 times more energy intensive than commercial buildings. Scott mentioned, commercial buildings, a big consumer of energy. And if you look at healthcare facilities, they're one of the worst. They're 2.5 times the average building. So Gundersen really understands that we are part of the problem. Consuming all this energy, it's causing health problems. So we got to be part of the solution. And so that's really a big seller and a reason why we can, really get people on board and pursuing this stuff within our organization. And we spend a lot of money. Healthcare is spending over, this data is a little old, so I'm sure it's way higher than this now. At this point, it was $8 billion on energy each year. So we really look at this as two-sided green. You go after the environmental issues and you go after the financial. And that's really how you can get yourself wrapped around going after energy issues. On the cost side, back in 2008, when we started going down this path, our energy costs were increasing at about a rate of 4% annually. We were spending about $5.3 million every year on energy. And it was increasing at about $350,000 a year. So, that's not sustainable, obviously. So we had to do something. That was a big selling point as well, is we've got to tackle this issue just so it just doesn't continue to inflate our costs. And this $5.3 million, we actually spent less than that last year. I think we spent 4.8 or somewhere around there. So, and we've grown by 1.5 million square feet. So it's been a significant improvement. So what Gundersen did is we started this group called Envision. And this group's focus is really to go after energy management really energy efficiency, renewable energy. We started going after waste management, recycling, and sustainable design. Those are really the 4 key points. And in my role, I really work on energy management and sustainable design. So we're going to talk a little bit more about those two things. The big part of this is really going after conservation. And that's really where you need to start. And the reason for it is the payback on conservation is typically less than 2 years, or it's even instantaneous. You get immediate benefits. Another thing it does for you is it gives you some amount of money that you can then reinvest in your renewable things. So we didn't start out by going out after doing renewable generation. We really started with conservation and saved money, got people on board. And once people are on board, we can start doing some of those other more complicated and challenging things. And what we found is that typically just through conservation, you can get 20-30% right off the bat, just going into a facility and working on conservation within a facility. I was just spent this morning up at our brand new facility in Hillsborough. We did an energy audit on a new facility, and we found air handlers that we're going to be able to shut down for each of them, 2 of them, for about 40 hours every week. So right there's probably, that's probably 10-15% of the total building's energy consumption that we're going to take out, with a 2-hour energy audit. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in conservation and just digging in. So this is really the things we go after when we're looking at conservation. We're going and looking at these in your facility. You've got boilers, you've got chillers, you've got cooling towers, you got pump motors, exhaust fans, air handlers, a big one. I just talked about the one in Hillsborough. So these are the things that you can really go after and have an impact, with controls on boilers and chillers, putting controls, VAVs on chillers. I know this is really nuts and bolts, but this is where, the rubber really meets the road. These are the things that are burning up energy in your building. So you've got to go in and figure out how do you turn them off, make them more efficient, and control them better. Exhaust fans on buildings, they're just sitting there pulling treated air, out of your buildings and kicking it out in the atmosphere. So if you can turn them off, shut them down when you don't really need to be running them, you just keep that treated air in your building. So there's a lot of things you can do there. Another thing on conservation is lighting. Lighting still continues to be an issue. This year, I think I've got 4 or 5 energy projects going on right now where we're just doing lighting projects, going in and replacing the old fluorescents with LEDs. So I know some buildings we did back in 2010. They're on their set. Actually, the building I'm sitting in here right now, this building was done in 2010. Updated the lighting then. We just updated it again last year with LEDs. So there's always seems to be a lighting project where you can go back in and do some work and get some big savings. Occupancy is huge. Going into your building and understanding what areas you're running, when are they running, and if they're not running, making sure you've got building automation where you can shut them down. We've got HVAC tech just last year, we found about $20,000-$30,000 worth of occupancy settings in our hospital. And our hospital is one of the most efficient hospitals probably in the nation. He's still able to find occupancy issues in a building that's really good. So there's always opportunities to go in there and dial it in tighter. Data centers, big issue. We found data centers where one data closet is driving an air handler to stay on in a building just because that air handler is trying to cool this data closet. So there's things you can do there to try and fix that as well. Personal computers, having things that shut personal computers off when you're not using them, and a lot of other things that you can do. So there's lots of stuff you can do and find in the conservation world. So for Gundersen, the results of a lot of that conservation work is just shown here. Back in 2008, we looked at energy use intensity. We were running around 180 kBTUs per square foot in terms of the energy, how much energy per square foot per year our buildings were using. We were able to drive that down to around 76 kBTUs per square foot. That's about a 54% improvement in the amount of energy intensity in those buildings. When you look at the dollar savings, 2008, we spent about 5.4 million. Last year, we spent 4.6 million, so less. And we added, we're over 1 million square foot that we've added in that period of time. We've done the math a few different ways. Currently, last year, we saved somewhere between $2.5 to $4.5 million on, in just 1 year on all that energy savings over those years, or all those projects that we've implemented over those years. So it pays back. All that site-based work you do will pay back. It may not be instantaneous like you want, but it will pay back over time. So once you've done conservation, that's when you can start looking at, do you do some other renewable stuff? Gundersen has done a lot of off-site renewables. We've shifted recently, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but we've shifted recently doing more on-site renewables. But when you start looking at renewables, you got to understand and be ready for longer paybacks. 5 years on a renewable project is really good. Typically, you're up in the 15-year range on a renewable project. Like solar projects, we're a nonprofit organization, don't get any tax breaks. So, a solar project typically is in the 12 to 15-year range. We might get lucky on one and get one around the 10-year range, but typically they're a longer term. Another thing that a lot of these projects do is they give you a hedge against inflation. As prices go up, the prices of energy go up, your on-site solar assets actually become more valuable. So it's kind of an interesting, and then more of them, more projects actually become more viable as electric rates go up. So that's always I love putting projects on site, because then it's just kind of a, daring the power company to keep increasing the rates, because then it just makes more and more stuff viable for me to go do. So it gives me a hedge against, essentially a monopoly. We're dealing against a monopoly. So this is my opportunity to kind of go head to head against them. Let's see here. Renewable energy things that we've done. These are, we currently have 7 solar projects that were in place. There's about 1.1 megawatts of solar installed. This year I'll talk about this quick first. This year last year, we sold our 2 dairy digesters. These projects were set up to sell to the utilities, and the way the rate structure and everything went, it just got to the point where it wasn't viable to keep them running. So we actually sold them. We took the money from that and we're reinvesting it in on-site renewables. So we've got 7 solar projects that were already completed. This year alone, we're adding 7 more solar sites for about 2.1 megawatts of solar generation that we're adding this year. So more than doubling our site solar generation this year. We have 2 wind sites off-site where we produce and sell to the utilities. Still viable projects, making money. We're actually upgrading one this year. We have 1 biomass boiler. This is by far the largest energy project we have in terms of offsetting energy consumption. This basically what we do here is we buy wood chips or wood pellets, looks like mulch. We buy it from, I think, 5 or 6 local lumber mills. It's their waste product. They chip it up for us. We bring it to our campus. We burn it, and then we don't burn gas. And this supplies all of the heat, almost all the heat for our campus, steam for our campus. And there's actually on this project, there's actually an electrical generator as well. So we produce a little bit of electricity from it as well. This one is probably one of my favorites. This is the biogas landfill project. And this is a project where we buy gas from a landfill that's just across the highway. So we're actually got a gas line that goes under the highway, comes over to our campus in Alaska. We burn that gas in this generator, or in this engine and power generator, then we sell the power back to the utility, and then we take the heat off of this. That's all this stuff up here is it's capturing heat, and we capture that heat and we use that heat on our Alaska campus to heat the facility during the winter. And then we have an absorption chiller. So during the summer, we capture that heat and we do a little bit of cooling with that heat with an absorption chiller. So it's kind of a three-prong project. It gives us electricity, it gives us heating, and it gives us cooling. And then geothermal, we got geothermal all over the place. You'll see that it's kind of become a staple for us here in a couple of other slides I've got. The results of a lot of this offsite work, windmills, all this other projects, is we've offset our carbon emissions by, all our pollution emissions by 80 to 85%. I think Jerry talked a little bit about asthma attacks and that kind of thing as well. So we've had an impact on that as well. And we achieved energy independence in 2014. I heard you guys might be thinking about doing a new hospital. So I threw a couple slides in here about hospitals and building new buildings. We built this building in I think it was 2014, I think is when it started up. This is our old building over here. And there's another really old one over here. We don't tear anything down apparently. But the number you see here, this is the kBTUs per square foot those facilities use. You can see where our old facilities are 260, our new one's at 130. There's a lot of work that went into making that happen. And then you look down here, these are our behavioral health. Our old behavioral health, 200 kBTUs per square foot. Our new one is 60. And this is really where you can have an impact, is when you are building new, go aggressive. You got to challenge your architects, your engineers to get you there. You got to put energy on par with budget, so that you've got the support to go do it. You know, you got to put a goal out there that's going to be aggressive for them, tough for them to meet, and push them to get there. Is what I'm trying to show with this, and it can happen. This is kind of what happened with our new facility. Our first energy model that came back when we decided to build this building, they came back with energy modeling that showed a building that was going to use 273 kBTUs per square foot. That was worse than average. So that was not acceptable. They came, we kept pushing them. They came back with a second model. It would be somewhere around 220. Still not acceptable. We were giving them a goal of 115. So, they're pretty much balking at us, saying we can't be done, can't be done. Eventually, they came back with a model that they thought would hit about 200. They said if you did a few more things, you might be able to get it down to 135. This is where we ended up getting. We got down to this 135 level after getting the building up and running. I think they threw the geothermal was added to try and get us to this point. This is where this building is now. It's at a 135 kBTUs per square foot. And that's this building that you're seeing right here. It's a 450,000 square foot, I think 6 or 7 story hospital building. So what's next for Gundersen? So we've shifted a little bit. We're not measuring this energy independence metric anymore. We're measuring it. We've just shifted a little bit. The metric used to be, we measured how much did we generate and sell versus how much did we buy from the utilities. We shifted that a little bit. What we're doing now is we're focusing on new construction. So any new construction, we're trying to get to a zero energy new construction. So these are a couple of examples. This is our Sparta clinic. I should have put a new one of it actually built, but this is the Sparta clinic. And you can see some of the things we did in that building. This building has actually been the zero energy building for 3 years. It actually has produced more power than it consumes for the last 3 years. So you can see some of the things we've done. I talked a little bit about geothermals. It's become kind of a staple for us. So the first thing is geothermal wells. We got 40 of them, 300 feet deep. We did decentralized heat pumps. Basically what those do is they move heat around the building. So if an area is hot, it takes heat from there and moves it somewhere else where they may need heat. So we find that a lot, that there's, in a building, you've got spots you need to heat and other spots you need to cool. If you try to move the heat around, rather than just expelling it and then recreating the heat, that's a great way to bring the building energy consumption down. We've got some rooftop solar, 100 kW. Another thing we found was spray foam insulation, huge improvement versus standard insulation. So it's pretty much become our standard. Any new building is getting spray foam insulated. Thermal break windows and doors. We typically just stick with double pane windows. We found the triple panes cost more, don't give you a whole lot more. There's other things you can do with the money other than doing triple panes. LED lighting, pretty much standard anymore. Aux sensors are pretty much standard anymore. And then this one does have a heat recovery vent system on the roof. So the air that we do expel, we try to capture the heat out of it and put it back into the building. And then there's a solar garden. So this building actually has a solar garden that we partnered with Excel Energy, 220 kilowatt solar garden offsite. And all of that makes the building a net zero or zero energy. We call it zero energy building. The building on itself uses about 25 kBTUs per square foot of energy from the utility. We compare that to a normal clinic, which is usually up around 75. So, it's a third. This is our Toma clinic, another new building we built in 2019. You look at the things, it's a lot of the same stuff. A little larger building, a little harder to get it to zero. We're not quite there, but it's really good. I think this building we're using at 45 kBTUs per square foot. Its peers are like 115 kBTUs per square foot. And you'll notice here, we did do a battery storage system here, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's our zero energy approach on new construction. The other goal we have is site-based energy independence. We shifted this from energy independence to site-based energy independence. So what you see here is we've gone out and we've benchmarked all of our facilities, or not all, most of our facilities, our bigger ones, and we've given them all, each one of these set of bars is a facility essentially. We've given each one of them a benchmark based on Energy Star, on how much kBTUs per square foot Energy Star gives the average building of that type. And then what we've done is the colored bars are actually our actual energy consumption. We measure that for each building. And then the color tells you is it above our goal or below our goal or way off track. So yellow is above goal, but not quite, but not above national median. So like here's the Sparta Clinic. You can see here's the Sparta Clinic we talked about, 24 kBTUs per square foot. I think the national median might have been, I can't read it, 90 something. There's a Toma Clinic right there, the one I just talked about. Then you can see some bad ones. It's Hillsborough Hospital. I was just there this morning. That's the new hospital we're looking at. It's off, it's not doing well. So we're trying to get that dialed back in, get that red bar to come down. And then you'll notice all these little green arrows. Those are active projects. We've got about 18 active projects or energy projects going on right now. And some of these have multiple projects, either lighting and solar. So the objective here is to get all of our buildings to the point where they're 50% of the median. We want them at or below that 50% of that gray bar. Yeah, so there were some questions when I was talking to Scott earlier, and I think Samantha, they asked a little bit about batteries. Are we doing anything with batteries? And we are. What we're doing with batteries is rather than buying a generator that burns diesel or natural gas, we're putting a battery in place where we can. It doesn't always make sense, but we're a clinic that only needs a limited amount of time of backup power. We put a battery in place. So this is our Toma Clinic. You can see some of the things here. Basically, what we did with this is we put a battery there that provides 4 hours of backup power rather than buying a generator. And then what we did, this chart, we basically just turned some software on. The software was just turned on a couple months ago. And what the software does is it frees up. We determined that we didn't need the whole capacity of the battery to provide that 4 hours of backup power. We only need about half of it. So we gave this software freedom to use the other half of this battery, which basically represents from here to there. That it gives that much of the battery, basically half, to go do peak shaving, solar capture, whatever it needs to do to try and save us as much money as it can. You basically plug it into the software, a bunch of parameters around how much we're paying for energy and all that. And the software watches the typical building, how it consumes electricity. The red line is the electrical consumption of the building. The yellow is the solar generation. You can see some days it's really bad. Must have been a cloudy day. And then the blue, that's basically the interaction, the battery's interaction with the building. So that's what we're just starting. We're just getting into this. I think batteries are kind of really right on the edge right now. They're a little bit expensive, but where we found to try and make use of them is rather than putting a generator in place, and that kind of offsets some of the initial capital costs. Rather than buying a generator and putting a battery in that costs 40% more, but I can do something with it. Rather than a generator, you put that in, it's just going to sit there, and all it does is cost you money. It runs for a couple hours a year when you test it. But that's kind of the route we're going with batteries. So we've got one here in Toma. I think that was the first one in Wisconsin. We've got 2 more actually on order. We've got one on order and one in place, just about ready to get hooked up, hopefully later this month or early next month at our West Salem warehouse facility. So we're just starting to kind of dive into the battery arena and see what's going on there, and see what we can make use of. And that's it. So this is my background, or my backyard. So when you talk about mosquitoes, here's our hospital right there. So you're going to talk about mosquitoes coming up here. There's a lot of breeding ground out there. So I hope that doesn't happen. So we'll I'll turn it back over to Scott.
Thank you, Tim. That was an amazing presentation. I feel like my stuff is spilling out of my head almost. So thank you for that. So since it's 8 o'clock, why don't I hit a couple slides that I wanted to touch on before we ended, and then come back to Q&A and just let people hang around to the extent that they're able to after that. So if you'll bear with me for just a second, hang on to your questions. Let me just say a couple things and then we'll get back to it. So one thing I wanted to point out was that Alexandria has a really good webpage that the Planning and Zoning Department has on the development that's happening various places in the city. And there's some upcoming events. So David and Stephen and I and others in the city who are working on environmental issues, these are opportunities to get engaged, find out what's going on, and get more information. And along the lines of more information, wanted to point out or say that we're putting on a second webinar on May 5th, focusing on what's possible with taking a district-wide approach to planning instead of just having to approach something as a collection of high-performance buildings. What happens if you try and build a site that kind of works together and fits together? So with that, let me back it up and go to questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So one question that occurred to me, Tim, is how often do you get other hospital systems in the area knocking on your door saying, hey, how did you guys do this? Can we start doing the same thing? Because it seems like it makes so much sense. What are some of the barriers that you think are out there that keep this from happening more often than it does, the kind of work that you're doing?
I think, it's probably looking at the financial side, and then, I look at, we're a fairly rural area. So when I look at, site-based generation, I typically have space to do it. I have space where I can do geothermal. I have space where I can do solar. You guys that are in the bigger cities, I kind of wonder, you just talked about the district stuff. To me, that makes a whole lot of sense in a congested, more, urban area. In the rural spaces, it's, we typically have space to do a lot of this site-based stuff. And I think people need to be aware is that, you really got to get after conservation on your existing buildings. You can't just go after the new stuff, the new exciting stuff. If you're not going in and looking at your existing building stock, I think you're missing a big opportunity. I don't know where you guys are doing and what you're doing, but I think that's a huge piece. Benchmarking your facilities, seeing where they stand up against peers, and then really trying to drive your existing buildings to a new level is a huge piece of it. So I think that's kind of what we've taken this approach of, if I'm going to build new, I'm going to go aggressive and try and get it to zero. And then all my existing stuff, I'm going to try and get it to 50%. I think that's kind of our two-pronged approach. And then the challenge is always getting the funding to do it. We're a pretty aggressive organization, and it's still sometimes hard to get the funding. I can imagine if, in other organizations where, maybe you don't have as much support, funding might be a little harder. But funding is always a big piece. Usually we have good ideas. We've got a lot of great ideas. I got lists of great ideas of things we could go do in different buildings, but prioritizing and getting the funding to do them is, always a challenge.
And as much as I was blown away by all the great stuff that you're doing, I heard you say relatively early on in your presentation that you felt like there were some mistakes that you had made. I think it's kind of odd asking about mistakes when there's so much great stuff happening. But anything that comes to mind that you wish you would have done differently if you had to do it over again?
Yeah, I think a piece of it is when you're off-site. When you're on the utility side of the meter, you are competing against a monopoly essentially. So you've got it's tough to you may go after a project that makes sense initially, but then the amount you're getting paid to operate that project going forward can change on you dramatically. And then like our digester facilities, the amount of maintenance required was kind of an oversight. So those facilities, the amount we're getting paid for the electricity went down, the maintenance required to keep them operating was a challenge. So that's essentially why they were, we ended up selling them. They're still operating in a different capacity, doing some different things, but so we're still, it's still great that we put them out there. They're keeping, methane from cows from just being expelled. But it's, there's some things we probably would have done differently there. I think of some other stuff. Yeah, solar early on, it's getting to the point where it is affordable, but we did a solar project early on that was probably not didn't have a real good return on it. But it was more of a showpiece that we were doing it. But solar is getting to the point where it's getting a little better, more affordable.
One of the last questions I'm seeing here in the chat is about retrofits of some of your original facilities or the original hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say a little bit more about how much of that kind of work accounts for your work day or your work week? Is that a huge focus, or is it mostly the new stuff?
Yeah, for my work, yeah, we're constantly looking. Every year we basically put together a capital project list, and a lot of that is retrofits on existing facilities. We've got a facility, just a couple examples. We've got a facility in West Salem, had us a geo system, but when we did the geo system, we didn't have the funds to do geothermal in the office space. So last year we, a retrofit we put through and got approved was to put geothermal heat pumps in there so we can use the geothermal to heat and cool the office space as well. So a big chunk of it is going back and looking at existing facilities and how do you drag them forward. The building I'm sitting in right now, a couple of years ago, it was about 100 kBTUs per square foot. We've got it down. I think it's sitting around 60 right now. We did lighting projects. We did some HVAC updates, some scheduling updates, and we're putting a 200 kilowatt solar array just outside. So, an existing building that was built in, I think, 2006 or 2008. So, there's a lot of opportunity in those older buildings to go back and look and bring them up and keep pulling them forward so they don't fall behind.
Excellent. David, is there anything that you want to ask of either Tim or Jerry? I want to make sure I'm not monopolizing the conversation.
Hi, no, this has been a fantastic educational evening in the sort of how-to and then what we should be doing and how we should be doing it. I mean, you guys have covered it all. I think one issue that's on a lot of people's minds now is resiliency. And it sounds to me like, Tim, you all are, now that batteries are becoming more affordable and solar is becoming more affordable, it looks like you're just kind of putting your foot in the water in terms of making these buildings more resilient for power outages.
We've thought about, putting a natural gas generator in, a turbine generator in as well. And we're creating a couple microgrids still early on, but we decided not to initially. I think if we would have put the natural gas turbine in, we probably could have created a building that was 100% resilient. If we would have lost power, we could have kept it running indefinitely, unless, obviously you run out of gas or something. Gas lines, can't get gas to the unit. But yeah, we initially, so what we're doing there, basically we did the battery portion, we did the solar portion. We decided not to do the generator, the natural gas turbine piece, but we might add that later, So we're kind of piecing the things together as we have the funds to do it. We're trying to pick the pieces that fit most aligned with our goal of, site-based energy independence. So, the solar makes a whole lot of sense because that offsets what I buy in terms of electricity from the grid. The battery makes sense because it allows me to optimize my solar generation and make that spread across a greater portion of the day. The natural gas turbine piece didn't make sense because I still got to buy gas from the and so that I see that as a negative, right? So we did decide not to do that portion of it. But so I think it's kind of part of our vision is to eventually create these facilities that are very resilient, can run if the power is totally lost, and we can run them for an extended period of time. But we're not quite there yet with that part. But yeah, what my view of batteries is they're still expensive. When you look at justifying a battery, it's a tough sell right now. Fortunately, I've been able to sell a couple of them to the building owners, the clinical regional clinical managers, but the reason I was able to sell them to them is because they wanted backup power. So I said, yeah, I'll give you backup power. I'm not buying a generator. I'll give you a battery, and then we've had some discussions and we've been able to make that happen. But it's kind of putting your foot in the ground and saying, I'm not going to continue to do this the old way. We're going to try something different. So our Sparta clinic, that building I'm talking about, that was an energy independent building. That building, the clinic manager came to us and said he wanted backup power because there's essentially no gas running in the building. There's no generator there. So that's where one of the facilities where we said, I'll give you a battery to do that instead. So.
Well, I'm really impressed, and I'll stop talking, but I'm just really impressed that you guys have approached this with an overall vision, but no doctrinaire approach about how you're going to get there. And you've sort of found your opportunities and made it pay for itself and made it affordable. And that seems like a great model. Yeah. So thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Paulson, as well.